Seeking answers makes up the very foundation of academic pursuits, regardless of discipline. And I should know, I've had 5 different majors so far. You might be tempted then to think that I hold some answers, at the very least, an answer. But you'd be disappointed, because despite my travels, research, and even degrees, all I can offer you with any certainty are better questions. Now, I'm willing to concede this is frustrating, as it's in human nature to not only seek answers, but to settle them. We like having answers so much, we're willing to settle for bad answers rather than no answers at all. We want a yes or a no, black or white, end or middle ground. We want to see our world in absolutes, in all or nothing. And for some things, that can work out. But the majority of our world exists in the in-betweens, the maybes, the most likelies, the probably nots. I'm not trying to sound like a human magic 8-ball here, but even in our research, we look for a yes or a no to our hypothesis. Those yeses and no's are more complicated. It's a no for the boundary of the experiment. It's a yes with a 99.9% probability to be true. The law of gravity, for example, we can all confirm to be true. It's not floating off into the great expanses of space. And yet that law is a yes, only until it isn't. I mentioned this idea of all or nothing thinking. These are your absolutes. It's either this or it's that. We're alive, we're not. Square a circle. 2 + 2 will equal 4. But beyond a few pure truths, the rest of the answers are harder to say. Is there a universal truth? Am I a success or a failure? What about this old flower game? He loves me. He loves me not. So when we're not trying to create an absolute truth out of the pure one, where else do we see this phenomenon? Apophenia is our habit of seeing patterns even when there isn't one. We like to make order out of chaos. We feel better about things we understand. So when we're faced with the option of randomness or this kind of looks familiar, we go with what we know. And you have to give us credit. We can accept the second law of thermodynamics, that systems become more disordered over time. And we really say, no, we're going to figure out the pattern anyway. Our need to form these patterns overtakes us. We fight the idea of uncertainty at any turn. We don't see singular stars. We see the Big Dipper. We fill in the space to see a face in the grain of wood, a circle, instead of a bunch of dots in a circular ring. That only works if we make use of negative space and disregard other input. If we take a step back, the Big Dipper isn't anything more than a cluster of stars among billions of others. We can't make sense of any patterns because there isn't one. Or if there is, it's beyond our ability to comprehend it. So if we can't comprehend it, maybe our machines can. After all, AI, machine learning, they deal with absolutes. They're created with algorithms, if-then protocols. We can finally get answers. The trouble is that we can't, or at least we can't yet to the degree that we want them to. I could put up the most advanced facial recognition software out there that tracks every muscle twitch, every micro expression, to make the best possible guess as to what emotion I'm displaying. And guess what? Still won't be better than a trained person. The reason that humans are better at this is we can take in huge amounts of other data than our AI systems can to put those micro expressions into context. My face might be showing anger, but what if my words are saying hurt? There's a space that needs to be read. And in the world of patterns, the ones and the zeros, that blank space might as well be infinite. When apophenia or seeing patterns becomes problematic, we can think we see patterns even when there isn't one. We see signs that point us towards a decision and justify it as proof that we should make that choice. Sometimes there are trends, but more often than not, we're disregarding input that doesn't fit into our worldview. Believing that you can see the pattern in the stock market or lottery and going all in can have disastrous results. Or what happens when you meet a new person and you get to check out that you have the same favorite movie? Is that a sign that they're your perfect match? If you think that it is, you're only going to see what lines up, and you'll filter out or ignore anything that doesn't. That's a cognitive distortion at work. Now, for a moment, think about when you're in the shower. If you're like most people, you have what I call shower conversations. Don't worry, these are completely normal. You might be thinking about a meeting at work or a conversation that you want to have with a loved one. Or you might make up an entirely new scenario in your head. The thing about these conversations is we become so detailed with them. We think of everything that we're going to say and everything they're going to say and how we're going to respond. And before you know it, you're in a fight with somebody who's not even in the same room. And, well, you've probably run out of hot water by now. Eventually, we have many of these conversations. And what happens? They go completely differently than they did in our head. Even though we thought we came up with every possible outcome, people, situations are so much more complex than anything that we can account for. And it'd be one thing if we had these shower thoughts and kept them as exactly that, shower thoughts. But we go further. We decide that we know the outcome and therefore we don't have to take the risk. We don't have to open ourselves up. We rationalize it as a done deal. So instead of saying how we feel, we stay silent. And in silence, we let fears answer us instead. When we answer questions out of fear, we take away our choices. Instead, if you can hold that space open, be vulnerable, you can open up a whole new realm of possibilities. Remember that infinite possibility? We can't compute that no matter how hard we try. So what should we do? Create a more perfect absolute system? An AI that can run through scenarios in a fraction of the time? Maybe. Maybe one day we'll get to the point where we can. Or maybe we'll end up in a never-ending fight against a slightly smarter printer who, the moment it runs out of magenta, gives up any grand plans of a robotic takeover. Instead of trying to create a more perfect absolute system, I believe we need to embrace the space between the ones and the zeros, our uncertainty, to realize that living with ambivalence doesn't have to be as uncomfortable as we believe it to be. In history, it's learning to embrace ambiguity, the knowledge that we can't possibly know everything that happened, because not all facts are recorded, and the ones that are then be recollected in a way that's biased. We all have our different stories, so whose is the right history? Instead of right or wrong, what if things just were? I believe that the only right way for me to be happy is to follow a set path. Get a successful job, find my perfect partner who must meet this list of criteria that I've met. What do I do? I'm still not happy. I might not need to throw everything out, but I do need to start asking better questions. What does a successful career look like? Is it the one with the most money? The prestige? Best work-life balance? Those are better questions. What about my relationship? I should be asking, who am I happiest around? Who can I laugh with, even when things aren't funny? Maybe that's better than this list that I've created and the boxes that I put people in. The boxes are the stars in the Big Dipper. They connect to form what we think that we want until we take a step back and realize the possibilities of everything that we might actually need. Now, as a therapist, my goal is to help clients work through their own ambivalence towards change. Ambivalence is where we live, and yet we're taught that it's a step between change and stagnation. Do you want to change, or do you want to stay the same? Again, this is all or nothing thinking. Instead, look to the patterns. Do I always believe I'm going to fail because I'm a failure? If so, that's going to change everything I do, from applying to that job to asking that person out. Why bother if I'm just going to fail? Now, if I can hold that open, challenge it, I can ask, okay, what happens if I fail? But this time, what happens if I fly? The moment that we believe that outcomes are inevitable, we stop trying to change anything. We get stuck in the wrong patterns. We create a self-fulfilling prophecy, but if you're so certain it's going to fail that you won't even try, what's the harm of trying anyway? Maybe you're right. It'll end up exactly the way you thought it would. But don't you want the chance to fly? I can't say that I've had many regrets in my life, but I will say that I don't regret the things that I've done, only what I've been too afraid to try. Now, as humans, we want more control over our lives, not less. It's easy to understand. We know what we like and what feels comfortable, so we can control as much of that as possible. We get to feel okay all the time, right? Unfortunately, we can't have control over most things. So instead of fighting a losing battle to gain control, what if instead we leaned into the flow of being present without trying to control the outcome? When we learn to embrace our own ambivalence, the unknown, the unanswered, we can pull back on the limitations of what we thought we knew and instead see multiple possibilities, sometimes endless ones. And we know through psychological and neurological studies that the more control we try to have over lives, the higher rates of anxiety we have, the more critical we become, and the overall less satisfied we are with our lives. So even though it seems like anarchy at first, breaking down these parameters helps us find a new way of going forward. This is in line with Buddhist teachings, and in 2,500 years, their philosophy to breathe and let go really does help us find our own version of truth and happiness. Now, of course, part of this is personality. So think of type A and type B personalities for a second. Again, this is all or nothing thinking, or a little bit of both. But consider someone who you would consider a type A personality. What words would you use to describe them? If happy or content isn't one of them, we have to find a better way. If you can take this a step further, by not making immediate decisions, we lose many of the cognitive biases that trap us, like all or nothing thinking, and we're more willing to examine evidence through a non-judgmental lens before deciding on significant changes. So even if this can be uncomfortable at times, it allows us to start asking the questions that truly matter. What do I want to achieve if I stop boxing myself into what I think my limitations are? Who do I want to be with, knowing that we might not have forever, but the time we do have is best spent together? Is it okay to try and fail, and then to try again? What are the questions at the root of your own life? You asked yourself them. And if not, what's the fear that's stopping you? When we ask ourselves these tough questions, we find our inner values, what drives us. We can then start to see ourselves and the world around us, not in black or white, but in the brilliant colors that it exists in. We get to see the stars. So the next time you have an option in front of you, and your first thought is to say no, stop yourself for a moment and ask, am I saying no to this because I believe it to be true? Or do I believe it to be true because of some fear? Cognitive distortions, like all or nothing thinking, become habit over time that is reinforced by pattern responses and behaviors. But you have to be stuck as a star in a constellation, and you have the entire universe to be a part of. That no that we forced an answer to before, what if we kept it as a maybe and allowed it to answer us over time? Maybe that answer would turn into a yes. It just couldn't before because of the constraints of how it saw itself initially. When we deal only in absolutes, in all or nothing thinking, we might succeed in getting an answer, but in doing so, we take away something far greater. We take away hope. Is there a universal truth? I don't know. Am I a success or a failure? Today, I'm not sure. Ask me again later. He loves me. He loves me not. For now, we'll hold on to hope and leave it unanswered. Thank you.